Indian summer is like a woman, ripe, hotly passionate, but fickle. She comes and goes as she pleases, so that one is never sure whether she will come at all, nor how long she will stay. This is the opening of Grace Metalius's 1956 novel Peyton Place, a rich sentence to be sure, but one laced with innuendo, with all the subtlety of a knife to the temple. This opening sentence, along with all the events to follow, brought notoriety not only to Metalius, but to Peyton Place. A fictional New England town, Peyton Place is a novel that self-proclaims to lift the lid off a small town, and it certainly lives up to that promise. Featuring salacious details of sex and violence, Peyton Place was more than a mere bodice ripper. It is propelled into greatness for its finger-pointing at the hypocrisy of small-town living, and how those who never leave the nest are destined to become victim to the gossip that more than likely plagued previous generations as well. Ignorance begets ignorance, as they say. Considered unfilmable due to its many storylines and heavy topics, a sanitized film version of Peyton Place came to the big screen in 1957, removing much of the content that made it a literary guilty pleasure. But this label of guilty pleasure is an unfair one, as there's a lot in Peyton Place worth talking about, chief among them, female sexuality.
Just playing a game called photography. You turn off the lights and see what develops.
Don't be fresh.
Why does the literary pantheon consider female-written literature about womanhood unworthy of standing on a pedestal? Does the soapy drama of Peyton Place bog down the message? How did the 1950s Hays Code harm Metalius's authorial intent and create one of the most bonkers melodramas of the decade? We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll break down how Peyton Place came to be and what exactly this thing is all about.
So if you're accused of being fast, you might as well run. That way you get to all the good things first.
Grace Metalius wrote Peyton Place in the early 1950s, wanting to explore and expose the trappings of small-town living in the United States. Rife with hypocrisy and misunderstandings, Metalius found herself utilizing aspects of her own young womanhood from New England, such as a nearby trial in the town of Gilmanton, New Hampshire, where a daughter had murdered her sexually abusive father. This incident would later inspire the character and fate of Selena Cross. Considered more than just a throwaway piece, Metalius optioned the novel with Messner Publishing, but the title had to be changed. Metalius had decided on The Tree and the Blossom, but Messner wanted something less clunky, more commercial. They collaboratively settled on Peyton Place, prompting Metalius to comment, "Wonderful, that's it, George, Peyton Place. Peyton Place, New Hampshire. Peyton Place, New England. Peyton Place, USA. Truly a composite of all small towns where ugliness rears its head and where the people try to hide all the skeletons in their closets." Although it received mixed reviews from critics, the novel found itself atop the New York Times bestseller list for 72 weeks in a row, and soon found an international market as well. If there were to be a modern equivalent for Peyton Place, it would be 50 Shades of Grey. It's something you would find tucked, no doubt lovingly, under your mom's pillow. There was a certain connotation with reading the novel and what the reader's character was perceived to be. Dismissed as trash, it still garnered attention. On her critical reception, Metalius quipped, "If I'm a lousy writer, then an awful lot of people have lousy taste." A reader can't help but feel a voyeur in the world of Peyton Place. Not only is the novel written in third-person omniscient, but Metalius makes one a fly on the wall for every event. This is achieved by Metalius' gift of writing in brevity, but also what she lets unfold after the last door is closed and the final curtain is pulled.
If any man would seriously ask me, I'd run away and become his mistress.
On the surface, Peyton Place presents itself as a spirited utopia of upright citizens who always go to church and find themselves on the moral high ground, yet age-old temptations of alcohol, sex, and bearing false witness come neatly packaged under that pristine bow. Peyton Place is a tapestry woven of the most rich-looking silk, yet on the flip side is a mess of knots and tangles. The main plot follows the lives of mother-daughter duo Constance and Allison Mackenzie, as Allison yearns for independence and exploration of her sexuality, while Constance is more buttoned up, giving her daughter a high benchmark to hit so she can rise above Peyton Place.
Well, I don't want you to be like everybody in this town. I want you to rise above Peyton Place.
It's my home and my town, and why should I want to rise above it?
Because its standards are low.
people spend their time trying to drag each other down to their own common level.
Constance is wooed by the recently appointed high school principal, Mr. Rossi, who finds it difficult to break down her barriers. Allison is a budding writer who initially writes what she knows, but goes on to have bigger, broader adventures that help elevate her writing. The novel also follows Selena Cross, a well-liked girl who has a troubled home life. Her stepfather, Lucas, is physically and sexually abusive to Selena, going so far as to rape and impregnate her. Despite getting along with everyone, she is still looked down upon due to her circumstances. The Crosses live in a tar shack outside of town due to Lucas's self-destructive alcoholic behavior, among other things. Selena undergoes an abortion from the local doctor at her own behest. After Lucas attempts to assault her a second time, she beats him to death and is put on trial for his murder. There are other plots too, such as the shy neighbor boy Norman gaining confidence after enlisting in the army, Dr. Swain being a well-liked yet church-adverse man, and the relationship between Betty Anderson and Rodney Harrington, whose father disapproves of Betty's loose way of life. The characters rub elbows for sure, and not so much clash as much as they all exist in the same world. Some plots do intersect, such as Rodney's father insisting he take Allison to the senior dance instead of Betty, or Constance employing Selena at her dress shop. But otherwise, Metalius asks a reader to consider these plots independently. As with many successful novels of the time, Peyton Place was adapted into a feature film of the same name. Starring Lana Turner, Arthur Kennedy, Diane Varsi, Hope Lang, and Russ Tamblyn. Released to critical and commercial success, Peyton Place more or less follows the events of the novel, but had to omit the bulk of its steamy content in order to see the light of day. When we come back, we'll take a closer look at the film version of Peyton Place and discuss why its various deletions neutered its overall effect. Beautiful as it is, Peyton Place never transcends its own visual grace, and I think this is exemplified by its incredibly melodramatic 50s style of filmmaking, due in part to the Hays Code. The Hays Code provided a metric of decency for all motion pictures before release. If you got an A, you were good to go. If you got a C, it would be bad for business.
How you talking, Rod?
Rodney, we can't do that. My mother wouldn't want
Don't tell me she's here.
No, she's at the movies.
Great. Put the booze in the bowl.
Come on, that's the one thing she made me promise, please.
Peyton Place received an A3, meaning it was acceptable for adult-only viewing. Throughout, not a hair is out of place. All lawns are well manicured, and even the dirty shack of the Crosses has a deliberate, filthy vibe to it. You can see that 20th Century Fox, the film's production studio, wanted to create something more true to life, but the restraints of the motion picture business at the time prevented them. A lot of the film's philosophical debates come from Constance and Allison, played by Lana Turner and Diane Varsi respectively. Turner, by this time was a veteran of the screen, was a respected actress who was trained in performance during the golden age of Hollywood, a student of the studio system. The irony of casting her as the straight-laced Constance was in direct contrast to her sex symbol status of her earlier career. As her career matured, so did her roles. No longer was she just a body, but some body. Diane Varsi was new to the cinema scene in 1957, plucked from obscurity and dropped into a prestige picture. Varsi holds her own against Turner, clashing with her in regards to sexual exploration.
By light, you mean being pawed over in the dark by some young animal with one thing on his mind.
Oh, Mother, don't make it sound like that. Everything has to be learned, even kissing.
And sex? Is that what you're going to practice at your next party?
You keep trying to accuse me of things I'm not even thinking about.
Considered a rebel by most, some going as far as to call her the female James Dean, Varsi plays Allison with an earnestness that comes across as aware rather than naive. While wriggling out from under her mother's thumb, Allison discusses sex quite clinically with Norman.
It's about time you learn that girls want to do the same things as boys.
While Allison is having this discussion, perfectly normal discussions I might add for teenagers to be having, Constance actively opposes sex ed in the high school, despite Mr. Rossi looking to implement it.
We neglect the one subject that gives them the most trouble in life.
You don't recommend classes in baby making, do you?
Only in theory. I intend to initiate a sex education course in the school.
Isn't that a function of the home?
You think it would be? And yet not one parent in 10 does it. No, sex is taboo in the home.
And it should be in the schools. Their
philosophies come to a head with a great slap to the face. What Metalius is doing here, and what is so titillating in 1950s moviedom, is the clash of the generations. One side pushes for more cavalier discussions of the facts, while the other wants discovery to be made when the time is appropriate. But then you have Selena Cross, who is forced against her will to engage in reproduction despite knowing little about it. Is the right time when a couple is married, or when a young mind is starting to have sexual urges? A progressive thinking mind like Mr. Rossi believes the facts should be presented as facts, something discussed openly and judgment-free, whereas Constance and others believe bumbling ignorance is right because that's how they learned. The push-pull between mother and daughter is one of the many debates in this story, but is perhaps one of the most resonant. Between the actresses, too, one being far into her career and the other so green, provides additional subtextual attention. Rossi reads as a newcomer to acting with some of her choices, while Lana Turner is a bad bitch who knows what she's all about.
Norman, you know what? I sent for a book just like that, in the same plain wrapper.
General delivery.
Really? The same one?
Listen to me, Selena. Listen. One of us has got to call.
I can't. No.
You must call them now.
Turner's scenes were all filmed in Los Angeles, meaning she did not fly out to the East Coast. This is apparent when outside shots depicting Constance are using a body double, or where a rear projection is obvious, or when, despite being outside, the house is a facade and the grass is turf. Like, touch some grass, Lana. Rossi, meanwhile, trekked with the rest of the cast out on location and offers some very natural moments.
Hey, Allison, I don't know what Betty's buying for your mother, but will you tell her to hurry up?
Okay.
Hey, Norman, you know what?
There's a place I know that I'd like to show you.
But your mother, how can you leave her alone? Mother's always been alone.
The scenes in that controlled studio environment ring with falsified niceness, while the exterior shots provide a more modern feel. Both Rossi and Turner are excellent in this film, and these approaches to their characters provide further examples of what makes their dynamic work so well. But what of poor Selena Cross? Going back to the notion of the film being too beautiful for its own good, the Cross household stands as a big point of contention. Despite being ramshackle, the destitute lifestyle of the Crosses is still glammed up. Selena is still able to have curled hair and nice dresses, and even Lucas's probably only shirt doesn't appear to be all that disgusting. The most successful portrayal from book to screen is Selena Cross. Her innocence, culled by budding curiosity, is what drives Lucas to assault her, but she isn't one to be overcome. She actively fights Lucas, verbally and physically. I like this moment where she throws a kettle at him. She could have easily been a limp character in this moment, but demonstrates her scrappiness of being able to avoid Lucas's charged advances. At least when there's a witness. Midway through the story, Lucas rapes Selena, and in the book, she requests an abortion and gets it. In the film, however, she's not only denied the abortion initially, but suffers a miscarriage after Lucas chases her through the woods. Selena is robbed of the agency she has over her own body, only able to get what she wants after tragedy strikes. Personally, I don't mind this change, as dramatically, it works okay. It does make Selena less active in that she cannot get what she wants. Lucas being the child's father is not enough to convince Dr. Swain that an abortion is necessary, but he is still willing to help Selena once the miscarriage occurs, even blackmailing a nurse into secrecy.
And if you ever tell anybody that this wasn't an appendectomy, I'll tell the whole town about you and that drug supply salesman.
Doctor, that's blackmail.
It sure is.
When Selena kills Lucas later, she does so out of fear, but shows intent when she buries his body. Not wanting to ruin her reputation with the town or her boyfriend Ted, she refuses to explain just why she killed Lucas. Selena fears ridicule at the hands of the town, or conflating her rape with being a woman of easy virtue. She fears Ted won't love her anymore for not being a virgin upon their wedding night. These fears are not unfounded, as even Allison fell victim to a skinny dipping rumor. Why is Selena to assume she would be safe from gossip? Selena does not admit to the rape herself. Dr. Swain does in order to strengthen her eventual acquittal. In an admittedly cheesy moment, Dr. Swain points the finger to all the citizens of Peyton Place attending the trial, claiming Selena was so ashamed to admit to already having a pregnancy and miscarriage, she would rather go to her grave denying this than seek help from a trusted friend.
It's time you people woke up. Perhaps today is the day that you will, because there's something much bigger than the tragedy of Selena Cross on trial here. Our indifference. Our failure as a community to watch over one another, to know who needs help and to give it. Selena's been living in a prison of her own long enough, one that we helped build.
This speech is enough to convince the judge of Selena's innocence, and everyone in attendance understands now. Yay!
Look, the problem is over.
The citizens of Peyton Place are almost as neurotic in their assholery as a Saturday morning cartoon villain. Their minds are changed from one thing to another as long as it's what everyone else is thinking too. Only a select few, our mains, know the true score. Metalius indicts Peyton Place more heavily in the book, and this is all but erased from the film, save for a montage of the families ushering themselves to church dressed in their Sunday best. It's all for show, to present oneself as pious and good standing. Mr. Rossi and Dr. Swain, who are not churchgoers in the novel, are seen attending. As an aside, I want to make a note about Mr. Rossi here. He is significantly softened from page to screen, mostly in that he exhibits a typical alpha male persona. While he attempts to get to know Constance through conversations in the film and gets pretty frustrated with her rejection, he does forcibly kiss her, which works as shorthand for a breakthrough on Constance's part. In the novel, a lengthy passage of Constance basically getting raped by Mr. Rossi is included and is considered the driving force behind Constance's change of heart. She just didn't know she needed someone to show her the way to break her out of her uptight funk. And this is problematic because, again, it rids another female character of her agency, yet she rationalizes this kind of behavior as acceptable because she didn't know it was needed until it was forced on her. Oh, and Norman's mom gives him enemas. This fucking book. I think this detail, as much as it makes Mr. Rossi and Dr. Swain more in line with Peyton Place's ideals, actually strengthens their characters. The men in Peyton Place are not as developed, but this one change, to align with the standards and practices of the time, show traditionalism can meld with progressivism and things will turn out fine. Dr. Swain is a churchgoer, yet assists Selena with her abortion and actively seeks to prove legally that Lucas is responsible for it.
Well, there was something about her. It was just Selena. Please, Doc, don't.
There's only one thing that'll stop me. You sign that.
Mr. Rossi is a churchgoer, yet advocates for sex ed to be taught in schools, and that educators need to be well funded in order to perform their duties to the fullest. Radical. I know.
In a town like this, if you can't afford to pay the principal of your school a decent salary, you have no right to be running a school, much less sending your own children to it.
While the film cannot put the focus on the town, it can add enough to the bigger picture to ensure our main characters cannot disclose any secrets lest they become social pariahs, which, in terms of stakes, is enough. What makes this all the more heartbreaking is when you notice how many of the characters tried to do something more with their lives, only to return to Peyton Place because those dreams didn't work out. See Constance.
She was born here, but she had ambitions and left. Married in New York to some advertising genius. When he died, she came back here.
See Lucas.
The minute they walk out that there door, they walk into a dog-eat-dog world. Just crawl in front of the big dogs if you want to eat. Get a job. I won't do it. I won't do it. That's why I'm washing windows, scrubbing walls, empty and ashes.
See the English teacher, who gives a rousingly depressive speech about hometown pride.
We're a small spot in a small town on a great big map. And maybe Peyton Place High School isn't a name that shakes the world, but it's a part of each of you forever. Make it great by honoring it, and come back to see us whenever you can.
All these things add up to a viewing experience that, while covering a lot of ground, isn't much more than a slap on the wrist for the people who cause such indifference. Gone are the moments of townfolk periphery, where Metalius hints at the cyclical nature of gossip. The film is lush and vibrant, brimming with artistry, but the squeaky clean veneer against the uglier inherent story beats don't gel as well as one would hope. For fans of Turner or 50s melodramas, it's still a must-watch. Peyton Place is regarded today as 157 minutes of prestige soap opera, a film that quaintly looks at the underside of polite society. The book, surely, helps to make the film more successful, but the same can't be said of the reciprocal. Small-town life through the lens of a teenage girl is not considered important or canonical when it comes to literary preservation, yet Peyton Place lives on. Why? When we come back, we'll look at the inherent bias against female-led stories and why discussion around domestic issues should not be hidden under a bushel. See you there.
Whoever knows what anyone's able to put up with in this world.
Sure took me a long enough time to know a little about myself and understand Peyton Place. Maybe we'll both be happier.
Peyton Place is a book that reads as tame today, but might still cause a stir. But why, if the novel is novel for its portrayal of female sexuality, is it often relegated to being referred to as trash and lacking any kind of literary merit? There is a notion in literature where classics are considered to be works of great platitude that dive into relevant societal or moral upheaval, usually through a male perspective. We can look at All the King's Men or From Here to Eternity for things like that. Novels written by women have a harder benchmark to reach because female issues are often thought of as frivolous or even unimportant. It's not for a lack of trying, but more of a confrontation of a woman's deepest desire, or the sexual desire of any person for that matter. Part of the rawness of the sex novel was its ability to represent human behaviors and emotions in the flesh, as it were, as knowledge unprocessed and unadulterated by social probity and conventional politeness. Dirt took readers down below, where the unfiltered truth was hidden. Desire and difference hovered over every page. Sexual desire, to be sure, but also the kinds of yearning and dislocation not easily translated into political understandings. And unlike pulp novels, which they tend to be confused with, many of the so-called sex novels were published by quality houses like Macmillan, Random House, and Julian Messner, and sold as paperbacks and hardback reprints in department stores and respectable bookshops rather than being confined to male-dominated spaces and train stations and drugstore news racks. Indeed, it was their proliferation as much as their content that made them so explosive, provoking some astute critic to describe them as the literary H-bombs of the 20th century, writes artist Cameron for PopMatters.com. When it comes down to it, audiences are afraid to confront their most carnal desires and are wary of having others discover them as well, hence the comprehensive bans on the novel when it was first released. With great public access to a story with such radical concepts like sexual liberation and judgment-free living, it's no wonder the film's producing studio 20th Century Fox decided to keep it on such a short leash. Excising all the salacious content did create some furor, but from a business standpoint, it all makes sense. I'm not one to be prudish, but there are moments in the film that still make me a little sweaty when I think of how 1950s audiences would have experienced Peyton Place. All the blatant mentions of sex stand out.
And sex.
And sex.
Sex is taboo in the home.
Rodney going down on Betty here. Norman gazing upon Allison in her bathing suit.
Norman, you're making me blush all over.
And Selena's rape are all pretty ballsy for a film of this era, as far as I'm concerned. It's amazing to think that even 10 years prior, in a film like Streetcar Named Desire, mentions of intercourse or even the pivotal moment of Stanley raping Blanche could only be hinted at instead of explicitly, textually referenced. But most importantly, the book is very liberal regarding its treatment of female sexuality. The women in Peyton Place are its beating heart, and the characters that receive the firmest development. There are many views on sexuality on display here. Constance is buttoned up to her neck, Selena is sexually assaulted and fearful of repercussion regarding her subsequent pregnancy and abortion, Allison merely wants to experiment with boys, and the town tramp, Betty, is open and secure about her sexual intentions. All are valid interpretations of sexuality, but forcing one viewpoint down someone's throat is when things get dicey. Sure, Constance believes she's on moral high ground for remaining abstinent, but we learn that Allison is the result of an affair Constance had with a married man, and that she herself had never married, and projects her own feelings of cleanliness onto Allison. Betty is never repentant or resentful of her free sexual nature, and, rare from the time period, isn't forced to suffer in the end. Editor's note here, it also comes down to inherent misogyny against literature written by females, and that women's issues are not deemed important or worthy of canonization. Metalius does imbue a lot of misogyny of the time into her writing, reaffirming gender roles usually without critique. And as much as Metalius explores female sexuality, everything is straightened out by men acting like men and women acting like women, with the women ultimately being subservient to their male counterparts. And when asked on the frankness of her work, Metalius said, "Even Tom Sawyer had a girlfriend, and to talk about adults without talking about their sex drives is like talking about a window without glass." And I see what she's saying here. She's taking a stance on the great elephant in the room when it comes to deleting the sexual desire of any person in social and romantic relationships, but she still poses her statement from the male point of view. Ugh. The film had to walk a tightrope against cleanliness and filth to even be released, and would disappoint some regardless. Thankfully, the film we have has enough of the novel's makeup to prove an entertaining watch. Something is always happening on screen, even if the condensed nature of filmmaking makes it a bit bonkers at times. Peyton Place stands as a precursor to other projects that would discuss abuse, sexuality, and scandal in more depth. Not just other films, but television shows as well. Further visits to Peyton Place include a 5-season soap opera that launched the careers of Mia Farrow and Ryan O'Neal, and an awful sequel called Return to Peyton Place that we're not going to get into today. The most radical bits of media are ones that hold up a mirror and ask you to look at what you are a part of. Are you offended by it because you recognize yourself in the tatters? Yet, are you willing to put to heart a message of tolerance and understanding for those who have experienced these things instead of creating a vitriolic vacuum? If there's any hope for the future, the answer to that is a resounding yes.